For our next lecture on synthesizers and samplers explained, we're going to start looking a little deeper into a sampler. So as we mentioned in the previous video, the basic difference between a synthesizer and a sampler is that the synthesizer creates the initial waveform basically from scratch, and a sampler is going to play back a pre-recorded audio file. So if you want to create some sampler instruments that are truly unique to you and are custom, you have to get your own samples. Okay, so before we get into that part of actually creating our own original samplers, let's take a look at how we can actually load up samples into our instruments that already exist. So the basic process here we would either record a sound directly into the sampler, which is much more common on the hardware samplers than it is on these software plug-in versions of it, but some will still let you record directly into them. More commonly for the software, you load in a pre-recorded sound file, like a WAV file is probably the most common. Now when you're doing this, always try and go with high quality digital audio files, meaning at least 16-bit and 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. You can go higher than that if you want. You get better quality, but it's going to put a bigger strain on your computer. But if your source files are MP3s, even if you convert them to WAV, MP3s are lower quality. So by converting it to a WAV, you're not improving the quality of that audio. You're basically just making it a larger file with the same quality it had as an MP3. So try and start with the highest quality sound file that you can. And once we have the audio file in the sampler, we're going to edit the sample. If we've recorded directly into it, we probably need to truncate or cut off the beginning of the recording so that when we press the key, we hear the note jump in immediately. And if there's a bunch of extra space at the end, we might want to truncate off the end too. So we'll edit the sample a little bit. And then one of the most important things is we need to assign that file to one of the keys on our keyboard. Okay, and that's going to usually be seen as MIDI note values. So A1, B2, C3, C sharp 7, that's kind of how you see the note. And you're just mapping it to which octave and which key on your MIDI keyboard is going to trigger that note to play. And there's other mapping we can do also with velocity and things like that. And we'll take a look at that stuff later on. Okay. Multi-sampling is another thing also. As you'll see with this little example I'm about to get into, when you take one sample and pitch it across an entire keyboard, it certainly loses its realism. If you're trying to sample an acoustic guitar so that when you play it on your MIDI keyboard, it still sounds like a real acoustic guitar, you need to do multi-sampling, meaning you probably want to sample every individual note on that guitar and assign each note to its own key, as opposed to sampling one note and just pitching that note across all the keys. And the velocity mapping is used in a lot of sampler presets to help create a more realistic sounding instrument. So if you think about, say, a piano, the lighter you hit the key is a different tone than if you hit the key really hard, really heavily. So velocity mapping helps you kind of maintain that envelope and harmonic content of the way you actually press the key down, how much force you use to play the key. And then we also have digital signal processing, all these effects that we can use to create kind of custom sounds too. So we can reverse the audio file so it plays backwards. Do all kinds of stuff. A lot of samplers will have flanger effects and of course your envelopes and your filters, EQs, compressors, all kinds of things that we can use to kind of manipulate the sound even further once it's in the sampler. Okay? So let's go back over to Logic. I've got the same two instruments pulled up. I've got Battery and the EXS24. So let's just take a quick look at Battery and how to load in our own samples. Okay, so what we're looking at now is just the blank default Battery template. So what I want to do is load in some of my own samples. All right, now what we're looking at here are all the ones that come standard. It's a lot of samples here, but they come standard with Battery. So you can use their samples and make your own kit, but pretty much all these samples have already been loaded into one of their kits that you can load up also. Okay, so I dropped a bunch just straight onto my hard drive here. So we got 2 kick files and 2 snare files. So to load them up, you just drag and drop them onto a cell. So I'm just dragging each WAV file onto its own cell. Okay, so now that I've got them loaded into battery, we can click on them just to hear the sounds that we've got loaded in. Okay, so when we click on a cell and we're on the main tab of battery, if we look right here where it says key range, we can see which key on the keyboard will actually trigger that particular sample to play. Let me find C1 on my keyboard. There it is. Alright. And then the next one, kick with some reverb on it, is 1 note above it, C sharp. Okay, and then we've got the first snare is the next note up, D. And my second snare, D sharp. So you can hear the 2 snares. They were actually recorded off of the same snare drum, but they're a little different in their tone. So maybe I want to go in and I want to actually like layer the 2 snares together so that when I play a note, I don't have to hit both D and D sharp together. I just want 1 note to trigger both of these samples. So I can just go in and I can just remap, say, snare 2 instead of D sharp, pull that down so that D is the note that triggers. So now when I hit note D1 on my MIDI keyboard, it triggers both snares to play at the same time. So we can map multiple samples to the same key. And then we also have, say, like envelope controls here also. So let me try on the snare here. Open up that volume envelope. And we can see the envelope is actually controlled separately by each cell. So now we're losing kind of that attack of the snare. Not really something I really want to do on a snare, but just for, you can kind of hear now, all we're getting is the reverb. But that's kind of cool about this particular sampler is that all of these controls that we have on our main tab apply only to the cell that's selected. So each sample can have its own envelope and its own filter and compressor controls that apply only to that specific sample. So you can really kind of get in and really get some nice custom sounds on this stuff. There we go, that's a little better snare. Get all my reverb from the snare, so I'm going to open up the hold. And this is basically the same as sustain, what we saw on the synthesizer lectures. It's just keeping the volume constantly at full level until I let go of the key. Alright. I think that's kind of enough for now. I just wanted to go in and show you how you can load in your samples into battery, how you can map them to the keys that you want to trigger them, and then just kind of how we can manipulate. We can use DSP on each individual cell as well as on all the sounds as a whole too. So it's almost like you have a mixer built into the sampler here with battery. So now with the EXS24, let's go ahead and load in a sample into this one also. So this one's going to work a little bit differently. So when I hit the edit tab, and we can see that right now this instrument's blank, there's no audio files loaded in. So I'm just going to drag and drop, say, the snare into it. So now we've got a WAV file loaded up. Right here, if the sound file you've loaded in is actually a pitched instrument like a guitar or something, violin, that actually has a note value to it, you want to make sure you map the pitch, the original key, the original note that was played by that instrument. So if the guitar is playing an F, make sure you actually map the original sample to the pitch F. That way it'll actually be in tune with the song. All right. Key range. As I mentioned with MIDI, the way that they label their keys is the note, as in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and then followed by a number. And the number is the octave. So the low bass notes are going to be on the left. They're going to be the lower numbers, even negative numbers. And then the higher you go, in this case, it's mapped all the way up to G8 to actually play it. All right, and then the little pitch tab right here, this is important if you're trying to create something you can actually do melodies with. It allows, it pitches the waveform up and down the keyboard. All right, so you can actually kind of, snare may not be the best example, but we're going to do this again with a pitched instrument. We'll actually record a sample in and map it to the keys and all that, so we get a better sense of it, but you should at least be able to hear how the pitch is rising on the high notes and then falling on the low notes. So that's kind of the basics here of how to load in your own sound, map it across the keys in the EXS24, which is the start of creating your own custom sampler instrument on this particular plugin. Now when we close the window, it's going to ask us if we want to save the changes that we made to this instrument. So go ahead and click save. Sampler instrument 1, I'm not really going to keep this. Alright, but now when we go to the preset menu in the EXS24, anytime I open up a Logic session, open up the EXS24, I'll be able to get to that instrument that I just created. So it's always available to me now that I've saved it. Okay. I think that will pretty well cover it for this little introduction to samplers. So in the next videos, we'll start looking at how to actually record in our own samplers, do some multi-sampling, and get a little more tricky with these instruments as we're making our sounds. So there you go. At least now you got a few new things to try, practice, and enjoy.